I never thought I'd be the kind of person to tell this story, but when your biological father shows up at your lawyer's office 22 years after abandoning you, demanding a piece of your inheritance simply because you share his DNA, well, that changes everything. My name is Amanda Thompson, and this is the story of how my parents gave me up for adoption at 8 years old because I was a girl, and how karma finally caught up with them when I inherited my adoptive father's fortune. Let me take you back to where it all began. Picture this, a small, cramped apartment in Detroit, Michigan, 1995. The walls were paper thin, the carpet was stained with years of neglect, and the air always smelled like cigarettes and disappointment. That was my childhood home, where I lived with my biological parents, Robert and Linda Martinez, and my older brother, Tommy. From the moment I could understand words, I knew something was fundamentally wrong with how my parents looked at me. It wasn't obvious at first, not to an 8-year-old girl who just wanted to be loved. But there were signs everywhere, little moments that would later make perfect sense when I understood the truth about their abandonment. Tommy got new clothes for school. I got his hand-me-downs, even though they were clearly boy clothes that hung awkwardly on my small frame. Tommy got his own room. I slept on a mattress in the hallway. When report cards came home, Tommy's B's and C's were celebrated with ice cream trips. My straight A's were met with indifference, sometimes even annoyance, as if my academic success was somehow an inconvenience to them. "Why are you trying so hard?" my mother would ask, snatching my report card from my hands without even looking at the grades. "It's not like you're going to amount to anything anyway." The night that changed everything started like any other. I was curled up on my hallway mattress, trying to do homework by the dim light that filtered out from under Tommy's bedroom door. My parents were in the kitchen, their voices carrying through the thin walls. At first, it was just the usual background noise of their daily complaints. Bills, work, neighbours. But then I heard my name, and something in their tone made me freeze. "We can't keep doing this." My father's voice was sharp, frustrated. "The money's not there, Linda. We're drowning here." "So, what are you saying?" My mother's voice had that edge it got when she'd been drinking. "I'm saying we need to make some hard choices. Tommy's going to be in high school soon. He needs things, real things, college money, car money. We can't afford to support both of them." There was a long pause. My 8-year-old heart was hammering so hard I was sure they could hear it from the kitchen. "She's just a girl, Robert." My mother's words hit me like a physical blow. Tommy's got potential. He's our son. He can carry on the family name, take care of us when we're old. But her? She's just going to grow up, get married, and become someone else's responsibility anyway. "The state program pays good money for foster care," my father continued, his voice getting more animated, like he was warming up to an idea. "We could use that money for Tommy's future, and we'd only have one mouth to feed." I pressed my small fist against my mouth to keep from making any sound. This couldn't be real. Parents didn't just give away their children, did they? But as I listened to them planning my removal like I was an unwanted piece of furniture, the reality began to sink in. "She's smart, though, mind see," my mother said, and for one desperate moment I thought she might be reconsidering. "Too smart, if you ask me. Always asking questions, always wanting explanations. Boys don't like girls who are smarter than them." "Exactly," my father agreed. "She'll be fine." Probably better off, honestly. Some family out there wants a little girl. We're doing her a favour. The next morning, they sat me down at our scratched kitchen table with fake smiles plastered on their faces. Tommy was already at school. They deliberately waited until he was gone. They told me about a special program where I'd get to live with a new family who could give me opportunities they couldn't provide. It's temporary, my mother lied, not meeting my eyes, just until we get back on our feet. But I'd heard their conversation. I knew the truth. I was 8 years old, but I wasn't stupid. They were getting rid of me because I was the wrong gender, because investing in a daughter felt like a waste of resources to them. The social worker arrived that afternoon. She was a kind woman named Mrs. Patterson, with gentle eyes and a soft voice that made everything feel slightly less terrifying. She helped me pack my few belongings into a small suitcase, some clothes that actually fit, a stuffed rabbit my grandmother had given me before she died, and 3 books I'd borrowed from the school library that I desperately hoped I could return someday. As we walked toward her car, I turned back one last time to look at the apartment building. My mother was watching from the window, but when our eyes met, she quickly pulled the curtain closed. My father was nowhere to be seen. Tommy wouldn't even know I was gone until he came home from school. The drive to the foster care facility felt like it lasted forever. Mrs. Patterson tried to make conversation, explaining how the system worked, telling me about the temporary placement they'd found for me, but all I could think about was the finality of it all. At 8 years old, I was learning the hardest lesson of my life. That blood doesn't guarantee love, and that sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones who hurt you most. The foster home was run by an older couple, the Johnsons, who had been caring for children for over 20 years. They were kind enough, but it was clear this was a business for them. There were 6 other kids in the house, ranging in age from 5 to 16, and everyone understood the unspoken rule. Don't get too attached because nothing here was permanent. I spent 3 months with the Johnsons, attending a new school, trying to make friends, trying to convince myself that my parents would come back for me once they got back on their feet. But the weeks turned into months, and the phone calls I was promised never came. The visits that were definitely going to happen soon never materialized. It was during this time that I learned to build walls around my heart. I excelled in school because it was the one thing I could control, the one place where my worth wasn't determined by my gender or my family's financial situation. My teachers noticed my dedication, my hunger for knowledge, my desperate need to prove myself valuable. And then, on a crisp October morning, Mrs. Patterson came to see me with news that would change my life forever. "Amanda," she said, sitting beside me on the worn couch in the Johnsons' living room, "there's a man who would like to meet you. His name is David Thompson, and he's been looking for a daughter to adopt." My first reaction was skepticism. After months of disappointment, I'd learned not to hope too hard for anything. "What's wrong with him?" I asked bluntly. "Why doesn't he have kids of his own?" Mrs. Patterson smiled at my directness. "He's a widower, Amanda. His wife passed away from cancer 5 years ago, and they never had children. He's a successful businessman, and he's been waiting for the right child to share his life with." When David Thompson walked into the foster home the next week, I knew immediately that he was different from any adult I'd ever encountered. He was tall and distinguished with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and when he shook my hand, he looked directly at me like I was a person worth knowing. "Hello, Amanda," he said in a warm voice that reminded me of hot chocolate on cold mornings. "I've heard wonderful things about you from Mrs. Patterson. Would you like to tell me about yourself?" For the first time in months, an adult was asking me about me, not my situation, not my problems, not what was wrong with me that made my parents give me up. He wanted to know about my interests, my dreams, what I liked to read, what I wanted to be when I grew up. I told him about my love for books, how I wanted to learn everything about everything, how I dreamed of going to college someday. He listened with genuine interest, asking follow-up questions that showed he was really paying attention. "You know, Amanda," he said after we'd talked for over an hour, "I've been looking for a daughter who's smart and determined and curious about the world. Would you be interested in being part of my family?" The word family hit me like a lightning bolt, not foster child or ward of the state or any of the other clinical terms I'd gotten used to hearing. Family, the adoption process, took 6 months to finalise, but David, who insisted I call him Dad from day one, made sure I felt at home immediately. He had a beautiful house in Bloomfield Hills, with a yard and a swing set he'd had installed specifically for me, even though I was almost too old for swings. My room was painted pale yellow with white furniture, and he'd filled the built-in bookshelves with classics and contemporary novels, telling me that a growing mind needed plenty of food. "Every girl deserves to be cherished," he told me on my first night in my new home as he tucked me into bed, something no one had done for me in years. "You are precious, Amanda, not because of what you can do for others, but simply because you exist. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise." For the first time since I could remember, I felt truly safe. Dad kept every promise he made to me. He attended every school play, every parent-teacher conference, every award ceremony. When I expressed interest in learning piano, he hired the best teacher in the city. When I mentioned wanting to learn about business, he started taking me to his office on weekends, teaching me about finance and entrepreneurship with the same patience he showed when helping me with homework. He never tried to replace my memories of my biological family. He understood that healing meant processing what had happened, not pretending it never occurred. He paid for therapy sessions with Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a child psychologist who specialised in adoption trauma, and he never made me feel ashamed for having complicated feelings about my past. "It's okay to be angry at them, Amanda," Dr. Mitchell told me during one of our sessions when I was 12 years old. "What they did was wrong, and that anger is a normal response to abandonment, but don't let that anger define your future." Under Dad's love and guidance, I flourished in ways I never could have imagined. I graduated high school as valedictorian, earned a full scholarship to Northwestern University, where I double majored in business administration and psychology. Dad was there for every milestone, beaming with pride that felt genuine and unconditional. "I'm so proud of the woman you're becoming," he'd tell me regularly. "Your biological parents have no idea what they gave up, but their loss was the greatest gift of my life." During college, I started working part-time at Dad's investment firm, learning the business from the ground up. He never played favourites or gave me special treatment, because I was his daughter. If anything, he held me to higher standards because he knew I was capable of meeting them. By the time I graduated, I'd discovered a talent for identifying promising startup companies and emerging market trends. Dad made me a junior partner in the firm when I was 25, and by 30, I was handling some of our largest accounts independently. Our relationship evolved from father-daughter to business partners to best friends. We had dinner together at least twice a week, often discussing everything from market analysis to philosophy to my dating life, which he took a hilariously protective interest in. Any man who wants to be with my daughter better understand that he's not just dating you. He'd tease whenever I brought someone around. He's dating the future CEO of Thompson Investments. And that's exactly what I became. When Dad decided to step back from the day-to-day operations at 68, he officially named me CEO, a position I'd been effectively fulfilling for months already. The transition was seamless, and the company thrived under my leadership. You've exceeded every dream I had when I decided to become your father, Dad told me during my official appointment ceremony. You're not just successful, Amanda. You're extraordinary. And it has nothing to do with luck or circumstance. It's because of who you are at your core. But success in business was only part of the life Dad helped me build. He taught me to value myself, to set healthy boundaries, to never accept less than I deserved in any aspect of life. When I dated men who tried to diminish my intelligence or expected me to make myself smaller to make them comfortable, Dad helped me recognize those red flags and walk away. A real man will celebrate your strength, not feel threatened by it, he'd remind me. Don't ever dim your light to make someone else more comfortable in their darkness. The irony wasn't lost on me that the man who became my real father saw exactly what my biological parents had deemed worthless: my intelligence, my determination, my potential for success. Where Robert and Linda Martinez saw a burden and a financial liability, David Thompson saw an investment in human potential that would pay dividends for both of us. As the years passed, I rarely thought about my biological family. I'd built such a full, successful life that their absence felt more like a lucky escape than a loss. Dad and I created our own family traditions, our own inside jokes, our own shared history that felt more real and meaningful than anything I'd experienced in those first 8 years of my life. When I turned 30, Dad surprised me with a trip to Italy, something we'd talked about doing together for years, but never found the time. We spent 2 weeks exploring Rome, Florence, and the Tuscan countryside, talking about everything and nothing, enjoying the kind of easy companionship that comes from years of mutual respect and genuine affection. You know, Amanda, he said one evening as we sat on the terrace of our hotel in Florence, watching the sunset paint the city in shades of gold and rose. Adopting you was the best decision I ever made, not just because of who you became, but because of who you helped me become. Being your father gave my life meaning I didn't even know I was missing. I reached over and squeezed his hand, feeling the familiar surge of gratitude that had become second nature over the years. I love you, Dad. Thank you for seeing something in me that no one else could see. I love you too, sweetheart, more than you'll ever know. That trip to Italy would be our last major adventure together. 6 months later, Dad was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The doctors gave him 6 months to live, but Dad, being Dad, managed to stretch that prognosis to 14 months through sheer determination and an unwavering focus on getting his affairs in order. He spent those final months making sure I was prepared for everything, not just the business responsibilities I'd be inheriting, but the emotional reality of losing the only real parent I'd ever known. "I need you to promise me something, Amanda," he said during one of our last serious conversations when he was still lucid despite the pain medication. "Promise me you won't let anyone make you feel guilty for the success you've earned. Promise me you won't let anyone convince you that you owe them anything because of blood relation or shared DNA. You don't owe anyone anything except what you choose to give freely." At the time, I thought he was just being protective, making sure I didn't let future romantic partners or business associates take advantage of my generous nature. I had no idea he was preparing me for what was coming. Dad passed away on a Tuesday morning in March, holding my hand and telling me how proud he was of the woman I'd become. His last words were, "You're going to be just fine, sweetheart. You're stronger than you know." The funeral was attended by hundreds of people, business associates, friends, employees, and community members whose lives Dad had touched over the years. Person after person shared stories about his kindness, his integrity, his mentorship, and his pride in his daughter. "He talked about you constantly," his longtime business partner George Williams told me during the reception. "Every conversation somehow came around to something you'd accomplished or something you'd said that impressed him. You were his greatest achievement, Amanda, and he made sure everyone knew it." A week after the funeral, I met with Dad's attorney, Harold Morrison, for the reading of the will. I expected there might be some charitable donations, maybe some gifts to long-time employees, but I wasn't prepared for what I heard. "Your father has left his entire estate to you, Amanda," Harold said, looking at me over his reading glasses. "The house, the business, all investments and properties, everything. The estimated value is approximately $47 million. I sat in stunned silence, trying to process the magnitude of what I'd just inherited. It wasn't just about the money, though the financial security was staggering. It was about what that inheritance represented. Dad had entrusted me with everything he'd built over his lifetime, confident that I would honour his legacy and use the resources wisely. "There's also this," Harold continued, handing me a sealed envelope with my name written in Dad's careful handwriting. "He specifically requested that you read this alone after you'd heard the details of the inheritance." I waited until I got home to open the letter. Sitting in Dad's study, surrounded by the books and photographs that told the story of our life together, I broke the seal with trembling fingers. "My dearest Amanda," the letter began, "if you're reading this, then I'm gone and you're beginning a new chapter of your life as one of the wealthiest young women in Michigan. I hope this inheritance brings you joy and freedom, not burden or guilt. You earned every penny of this money through your intelligence, your work ethic, and your character. You were never just my heir, you were my partner, my protégé, and my greatest source of pride. This money represents decades of investments we made together, decisions we discussed, risks we calculated as a team. I want you to remember something important in the days ahead. You don't owe anyone anything because of what you've inherited. This is your money now, earned through legitimate means and left to you by someone who loved you unconditionally. Don't let anyone guilt you into believing otherwise. Use this gift to build the life you want, to support the causes you believe in, and to create the kind of security that no one can ever take away from you. But most importantly, use it as proof of your own worth. You are valuable, Amanda, not because of this inheritance, but because of who you are. I love you forever, Dad. As I folded the letter and placed it carefully back in the envelope, I felt a profound sense of completion. The little girl who had been abandoned for being just a girl had grown up to inherit a fortune that most people could only dream of. The child who was deemed not worth investing in had become a successful businesswoman in her own right, earning this inheritance through merit and love rather than mere genetics. For 3 months after Dad's death, I focused on managing the transition of full ownership of Thompson Investments, handling the legal requirements of the inheritance, and grieving the loss of the most important person in my life. The business continued to thrive under my leadership, and I found comfort in throwing myself into work while processing the enormous changes in my life. I should have known that a $47 million inheritance wouldn't stay private forever. Despite our best efforts to keep the details confidential, word eventually leaked out. Probably through someone at the probate court or the tax assessor's office. Within a few weeks, the story had spread through the local business community, and from there it was only a matter of time before it reached the wrong ears. But I had no idea that my greatest test was just beginning, or that the people who had abandoned me 22 years earlier were about to resurface in the most calculated, manipulative way possible. The little girl they had thrown away was about to face the adult consequences of their decision. And this time, I wouldn't be helpless or naive. This time, I'd be ready. The first sign that my peaceful new life was about to be disrupted came on a Thursday morning in June, exactly 4 months after Dad's funeral. I was in my office at Thompson Investments reviewing quarterly reports when my assistant Sarah buzzed in with an unusual tone in her voice. "Amanda, there's a man here to see you. He says he's your father." My blood ran cold. For a moment, I couldn't speak. There was only one person who could make that claim, and the fact that he was here in my office after 22 years of silence could only mean one thing. "Did he give you a name?" I asked, proud of how steady my voice sounded despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. "Robert Martinez. He says it's urgent family business." I closed my eyes and took 3 deep breaths, the way Dr. Mitchell had taught me all those years ago. This moment had always been a possibility, lurking in the back of my mind like a distant threat. But somehow I'd convinced myself that people who could abandon an 8-year-old child were too callous to ever feel regret or seek reconciliation. Now I realized how naive that assumption had been. They weren't here for reconciliation. They were here for money. "Give me 5 minutes, then send him in," I told Sarah. "And Sarah, whatever happens in this meeting, I want you to take detailed notes. Everything he says, everything I say, can you do that for me?" "Of course, Ms. Thompson. Are you okay?" "I'm fine, just prepared." I used those 5 minutes to centre myself, to remember everything Dad had taught me about power dynamics and negotiation. I straightened my shoulders, smoothed my navy blazer, and positioned myself behind my desk in the leather chair that had been Dad's for 30 years. If Robert Martinez thought he could intimidate or manipulate the scared little girl he'd abandoned, he was about to learn how wrong he was. When he walked into my office, I felt like I was looking at a ghost. He'd aged considerably. His dark hair was now completely grey, deep lines etched around his eyes and mouth, and he carried himself with the defeated posture of a man who'd made too many bad decisions. But it was definitely him, the man who decided I wasn't worth keeping. "Amanda," he said, and his voice cracked slightly on my name. "My God, look at you. You're so successful." I didn't stand up to greet him. I didn't invite him to sit down. I simply looked at him with the cool professionalism I reserved for particularly unpleasant business meetings. "Mr. Martinez," I said formally, "to what do I owe this unexpected visit?" The formal address clearly caught him off guard. His face fell slightly as if he'd expected me to run around the desk and embrace him like the lost daughter in some Hallmark movie reunion. "Mr. Martinez?" he repeated, attempting a wounded smile. "Sweetheart, I'm your father." "No," I said calmly. "David Thompson was my father. He's the man who raised me, educated me, loved me, and taught me everything I know about business and life. You're simply the man who provided half of my DNA before deciding I wasn't worth the investment." Robert's face flushed red, and I could see him struggling to control his temper, a trait I remembered all too well from my childhood. But he was here for something, and he couldn't afford to alienate me completely. "Look, Amanda, honey, I know we have things to work through. Your mother and I, we made mistakes when you were young. We were in a bad place financially, and we thought we were doing what was best for you, what was best for me." I leaned back in my chair, genuinely curious to hear how he'd rationalize their decision. "You thought abandoning an 8-year-old child because she was the wrong gender was what was best for her? You heard that?" He looked genuinely surprised, which told me everything I needed to know about how little thought he'd given to the trauma he'd inflicted. "I heard everything, Robert. I heard you and Linda discussing how girls weren't worth the investment, how Tommy needed the resources more because he could carry on the family name. I heard you calculating how much money the state would pay you for putting me in foster care. I heard every word." The silence stretched between us, heavy with 22 years of consequences. Robert shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting around my office, taking in the expensive furniture, the awards on the walls, the view of downtown Detroit through the floor-to-ceiling windows. "We were wrong," he finally said, and for a moment I almost believed he might actually be here to apologize. "We were so wrong, Amanda. We had no idea. We never imagined you'd become so successful. If you had known what? That your daughter might actually amount to something despite being female? That investing in me might have paid dividends after all?" "That's not what I meant." "That's exactly what you meant." I stood up now, using my full height to establish dominance in the conversation. "You're not here because you regret abandoning me. You're here because you found out about my inheritance." The mask slipped from his face for just a moment, and I saw the calculating expression I remembered from my childhood. The look he got when he was figuring out how to manipulate a situation to his advantage. "Your mother is sick, Amanda," he said, switching tactics. "Cancer? Stage 3? The medical bills are destroying us. Tommy lost his job 6 months ago and his wife left him. She took the kids. We're losing the house and—" "Stop." I held up my hand. "Just stop. You have some nerve coming here with sob stories, expecting me to care about people who threw me away like garbage." "You're our daughter." "No, I'm not. I was your daughter for 8 years, and you decided I wasn't worth keeping. You don't get to claim me now, because it's convenient." Robert's composure finally cracked completely. "God damn it, Amanda, we're family. That has to count for something. You've got $47 million. What's a few $100,000 to help your dying mother?" There it was. The real reason for his visit, laid bare without pretense. I sat back down and looked at him with the kind of cold assessment I'd learned from watching Dad handle difficult clients. "How did you find out about the inheritance, Robert?" "It doesn't matter how we found out. What matters is that you have a responsibility to help your family." "No, what matters is that you've been tracking my financial situation, which means this visit was planned and calculated. Tell me, how long have you been monitoring my life? Did you know about my success before Dad died? Were you just waiting for the right moment to cash in?" His silence told me everything I needed to know. "Get out of my office," I said quietly. "Amanda, please. Just listen to me. Your mother is dying. She wants to see you before—" The same mother who called me just a girl and agreed that I wasn't worth keeping. The same mother who watched me pack a suitcase with my few possessions and didn't even hug me goodbye? She wants to see me now? People change, Amanda. We've changed. No, Robert, your circumstances changed. You're desperate for money and you think I'm your lottery ticket. But I'm not a scared 8-year-old anymore. I'm a successful businesswoman who learned to recognize manipulation from professionals much more skilled than you. I pressed the intercom button. "Sarah, please call security. Mr. Martinez is leaving now." "Wait." Robert's voice cracked with desperation. "Just think about it, okay? We're staying at the Red Roof Inn on 8 Mile. Your mother really is sick, Amanda. Whatever you think of us, she's still the woman who gave birth to you. And then threw me away because I was born with the wrong chromosomes. Don't forget that part." As security escorted Robert from the building, I remained seated at my desk. My hands surprisingly steady despite the emotional earthquake I just experienced. The scared, abandoned 8-year-old deep inside me was screaming, but the successful 30-year-old woman Dad had raised was already thinking strategically. This wasn't over. Robert Martinez hadn't driven to Detroit from wherever they were living now just to make one plea and give up. People desperate for money don't take no for an answer easily, especially when they're convinced they have some kind of claim on you. I called my attorney, Harold Morrison, and scheduled an emergency meeting for that afternoon. Then I did something that would have made Dad proud. I started planning my response instead of just reacting emotionally. The meeting with Harold was illuminating in ways I hadn't expected. When I explained what had happened, his expression grew increasingly grim. "Amanda, I have to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Has anyone else contacted you about your inheritance? Any relatives, family, friends, anyone claiming some connection to your past? No, just Robert today. Why? Harold opened a file folder and pulled out several documents. Because we've received 3 separate inquiries about your inheritance in the past 2 weeks. One from a law firm claiming to represent interested family members. One from a private investigator asking about the legitimacy of your adoption. And one from someone claiming to be your biological brother asking about his rightful share of what he called family assets. My stomach dropped. Tommy? I assume that's your biological brother? Yes. Harold, what exactly are they trying to do? They're building a case to contest your inheritance. It's a long shot legally, but that doesn't mean they won't try. The fact that your biological father showed up today suggests they're coordinating their efforts. I felt the familiar surge of anger that had become my default response to manipulation attempts. Can they actually do anything? Dad legally adopted me. I have no legal relationship to the Martinez family anymore. You're absolutely right about the legal reality, but they might try to claim that David Thompson was coerced or deceived in some way, or that there were irregularities in the adoption process. Again, it's unlikely to succeed, but it could tie up your assets in court for months or even years. What do you recommend? Harold leaned back in his chair, studying me with the same careful assessment I'd learned from Dad. I recommend we get ahead of this. If they're planning legal action, we should be prepared with our own strategy. And Amanda, I think you should consider hiring a private investigator to find out exactly what the Martinez family has been up to for the past 22 years. That evening, I sat in Dad's study, surrounded by his books and photographs, trying to process everything that had happened. The man who had abandoned me was back, demanding money he had no right to, and apparently he'd brought reinforcements. But as I sat there, something Dad had said during his final months came back to me. Promise me you won't let anyone make you feel guilty for the success you've earned. Promise me you won't let anyone convince you that you owe them anything because of blood relation or shared DNA. It was almost as if he'd known this day would come. Maybe he had. Dad had been incredibly intuitive about people, and he'd had 47 million reasons to worry about opportunists coming out of the woodwork after his death. I made 3 phone calls that night. The first was to Marcus Webb, a private investigator who'd done work for Thompson Investments in the past. The second was to Janet Sullivan, a family law attorney who specialised in adoption cases and inheritance disputes. The third was to Dr. Mitchell, my childhood therapist, because I knew I was going to need professional support to navigate the emotional minefield ahead. Marcus Webb's report arrived 5 days later, and it painted a picture that was both predictable and infuriating. Robert and Linda Martinez had never recovered from their financial difficulties. They'd moved from apartment to apartment, job to job, accumulating debt and making increasingly desperate decisions. Tommy had followed in his father's footsteps, struggling with addiction and unemployment, cycling through failed relationships and get-rich-quick schemes. But the most damning discovery was a series of internet searches on Linda's computer, dating back to 6 months before Dad's death. She'd been Googling my name regularly, tracking news about Thompson Investments, and had even found my college graduation announcement in Northwestern's alumni magazine. They'd known about my success for years. They'd known Dad was sick. And they'd been planning this approach long before his death, waiting for the optimal moment to swoop in and claim their piece of what they saw as easy money. The legal consultation with Janet Sullivan was equally revealing. She confirmed Harold's assessment that the Martinez family had virtually no chance of successfully contesting my inheritance. But she also warned me about the emotional toll of a prolonged legal battle. They don't have to win, Amanda, she explained. They just have to make your life miserable enough that you'll pay them to go away. It's legal extortion, essentially. So what are my options? We can wait for them to make their move and respond defensively. Or we can take proactive legal action to prevent them from harassing you. We could seek restraining orders, cease and desist orders, or even pursue criminal charges if they're threatening you. What would you do if it were your family trying to extort you? Janet smiled grimly. I'd make them regret ever thinking they could manipulate me. But that's just my personality. I liked Janet immediately. The session with Dr. Mitchell was the most emotionally challenging of the three. She helped me work through the complex feelings that Robert's visit had stirred up. The old abandonment trauma mixing with my adult anger and my protective instincts about Dad's legacy. It's natural to feel conflicted, she said during our 2-hour session. The 8-year-old part of you still wants their approval and love, even though the adult part of you knows they're only here for money. But Amanda, you need to remember that your worth isn't determined by their opinion of you. It never was. I know that intellectually, but seeing him in my office, hearing him call me sweetheart like nothing had happened, it brought everything back. Of course it did. Trauma doesn't just disappear because we're successful. But you're not that powerless little girl anymore. You have resources, legal protection, and most importantly, you have the emotional skills to recognize manipulation when you see it. So, what do? You protect yourself and the life you've built. Your father, David Thompson, gave you tools and resources for a reason. Use them. That night I made my decision. I wasn't going to wait for the Martinez family to make their next move. I wasn't going to spend months or years looking over my shoulder, wondering when they'd strike next. And I definitely wasn't going to let them tarnish Dad's legacy with their desperate schemes. I called Marcus Webb and asked him to dig deeper into their current situation. I wanted to know everything, their debts, their legal troubles, their weaknesses. If they wanted to play hardball with someone they thought was still the vulnerable little girl they'd abandoned, they were about to learn exactly how wrong they were. The comprehensive report arrived a week later, and it was even worse than I'd imagined. Robert had been fired from his last 3 jobs for theft or incompetence. Linda's cancer diagnosis was real, but they'd been lying about the severity. She was in stage 1 with an excellent prognosis and insurance that covered most of her treatment costs. Tommy's situation was the most pathetic of all. He'd been arrested twice for drug possession, had defaulted on multiple loans, and was currently being sued by his ex-wife for unpaid child support. He was living in his parents' basement and working sporadically as a day labourer. But the most interesting discovery was a series of text messages Marcus had obtained through his contacts in law enforcement. The Martinez family had been discussing their strategy for approaching me, including suggestions to play up the guilt angle and make her feel sorry for Mom. They'd even discussed hiring an attorney to threaten legal action, thinking it would scare me into a quick settlement. What they didn't realise was that their threats had just given me grounds for a restraining order and potentially criminal charges for attempted extortion. As I read through the evidence of their calculated manipulation, I felt something I hadn't experienced since the early days after my adoption. Absolute clarity about who these people were and what they deserved. They had thrown away a daughter because she was born female, then spent 22 years ignoring her existence until she became wealthy enough to be useful to them. They had caused immeasurable trauma to a child, never bothering to wonder or care how their abandonment had affected her. And now they wanted to waltz back into her life and claim a piece of the success she'd built despite them, not because of them. It was time for the Martinez family to learn that actions have consequences, even when those consequences take 22 years to arrive. I picked up my phone and dialed Janet Sullivan's number. Janet, it's Amanda Thompson. I'm ready to take proactive action against my biological family. How quickly can we get restraining orders and cease and desist letters prepared? I can have everything ready by tomorrow morning. Are you sure about this, Amanda? I've never been more sure of anything in my life. They want to play games with someone they think is still that scared little girl they abandoned. It's time they met the woman that little girl became.